Hello, my name is Navy Lynch, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Kenya and climate change, especially the effect it has on water resources. The main impacts of climate change in Kenya uh, are divided into five categories: ecosystems, energy and infrastructure, agriculture, human health, and water resources. So, as far as ecosystems go, there's the biggest issues is that there's rising temperatures, rainfall variability, and sea level rise are a big problem as well. So there's a lot more droughts as well as a lot more flooding, which can cause a ton of issues. Um, the ranges for native species have completely shifted, similar to the U.S., how our soil zones have shifted. So that causes for a loss of biodiversity, and people's economies that are based around the plants that they've been growing their whole lives have been shifting and changing, which has a huge impact. Also, the coastal wetland habitats, mangroves, coral reefs, and fisheries are all being severely affected by this because obviously of the sea level rise. And this in turn is causing an economic loss as well to tourism, as the ecosystem isn't as beautiful to tour. For energy and infrastructure, there's rising temperatures and evaporation rate, an increased frequency and intensity of heavy rainfall, and sea level rise also in energy and infrastructure. So the biggest issue that I found was that there's increased flooding and landslides, which can mess up the infrastructure and the power generation in the areas. So if you have got like a power plant or something, a lot of them are being destroyed by the increase in natural disasters, which is causing economic issues, as well as since they've got a coast, there's a lot of issues with the destruction of ports due to sea level rise, which their economy and infrastructure rely on heavily. Agriculture, I think, is probably one of the biggest issues because of the increase of rain and the increase of droughts. So there's less grain yield, and the quality of their yields is significantly lower due to the heat and water stress. Also, with all of their livestock, with the increase in heat, they aren't producing as well, and there's a higher risk of death due to overheating, which can affect the milk production as well as the meat production. And then crop damage and degraded crop and pasture land is a big issue with the increase of environmental issues. As far as human health goes, the biggest problem that I found was that with the increase in temperatures, there's a lot more heat stress related mortality. Everybody is getting overheated, and lots of people in these areas don't have, AC and stuff. So it's causing big issues for that. Also, vector and waterborne diseases like malaria and cholera are spreading faster and faster due to the increase in heat. And going back to the agriculture, if your fields aren't growing as much, then there's more food insecurity and malnutrition among the people, which is majorly problematic, and causes a lot of deaths. Okay, so for water, the biggest things are accessibility, quality, and usage. So accessibility is lowering because of it's lowering in some places and raising in other places. Some places are having extreme droughts. Some places are having extreme flooding. So there's a variability in the amount of water that people have access to. Quality, with the sea level rise, there's a lot of saltwater intrusion. And so even if you have access to water, it might not be high quality or it might not be even drinkable. And then usage, so you have to be able to use your water wisely. You have to either save it up if you're having a drought or, figure out some way to displace it if there's a lot of flooding. So there's more water scarcity and variability for irrigation, domestic use, hydropower, and industry. So they rely a lot on water. And if there's more droughts, then it's going to be highly problematic. Also, there's lots of flood damage to the water supply and sanitation infrastructure. So even if you have access to the water, if there's a lot of flooding, it's going to screw up your system because it can't handle all of that water. The main effect, this is what I would consider the main effect of climate change, is the increased flooding and droughts have numerous other consequences. They affect agriculture, human health, infrastructure, energy, pretty much everything. This is basically the core of the climate change impact. So as far as media goes, I looked at all of these different news sources in Kenya. I just Googled the main news sources in Kenya and scrolled through their websites in between the dates 420 and 424. And just I looked on their main pages and I wrote down what I found that was related to climate change. So Daily Nation and The Standard are the two main ones. That's why they're in bold. And I was found one increased in flooding article, and in The Standard I found multiple accounts of flooding, like at least 4 articles just about all of the increase in floods and what farmers can do and how it's impacting, what areas are being impacted. So they talk about flooding a lot. The other ones, let's see, Breaking Kenya News didn't have anything. Business Today had an article about the quality of water, which was interesting. It wasn't about flooding or not. Kenya Moja had nothing about climate. It was pretty much all entertainment. Kenya Buzz was advertising a sustainability forum, which I found interesting. And then the Daily Mail had one climate change article and then one article about how to sustainably grow food, which was quite interesting. They're becoming more aware about sustainability and how to deal with these issues as they rise more. So overall, climate change itself is not represented well. There's low coverage locally. Media in Kenya often react extremely to new research and then burn out, which is sort of what the US does. Like if there's a big study, they'll like blow it out of proportion and then never talk about climate change again. So climate change globally is not generally covered. However, there's tons of articles and pieces about localized effects of climate change, such as flooding or droughts, or agriculture, or mudslides, or saltwater intrusion, sea level rise. So they talk a lot about local, but they haven't, the media at least, has not made the connection to that being a global climate change. It's more of a, oh hey, our weather's getting more extreme. So the political landscapes effect. So Kenya as a whole is super progressive, has a large clean energy sector, very environmentally conscious constitution. Like their constitution is written in that people have the right to a clean and well cared for environment, which is huge. But currently there's a rich political elite that continue to support coal and oil industries, which is similar to the US. The rich people are sort of getting their way with their industries. May 2016, however, they did pass the Climate Change Act, but it's challenging to enact all of that without the full support of the government, which is currently being controlled by a political elite. The people's reaction to climate change. So it's similar to media. People are heavily affected and are taking notice to the increase in flooding and droughts, but they haven't been able to make the connection to climate change. So lots of people are beginning to notice the lack of rain or the increase of rain, and so much so that the Human Rights Watch has had lots of attention given to lack or surplus of rainwater in Kenya and are claiming that it could be a human rights violation. People in Kenya notice the changes, however, they do not associate said changes with a larger global issue, and they rather blame it on local deforestation or pollution. So Kenya Talks Climate did this really great thing where they interviewed a bunch of Kenyans and talked about what they thought about all of that sort of stuff, and they totally notice all of the localized stuff, but they haven't been able to connect it to climate change. They rather think that, oh, well, we cut down this forest earlier, that's why we're having a drought. Or, well, we're polluting over here at this industry, and that's why we're having flooding. They're not connecting it to a global issue. Compared to the US, we might be worse off because our government is completely in denial about climate change at the moment. And our Constitution has nothing about the environment. There's no amendments about a right to environmental safety or anything. Whereas Kenya at least has in the core of their government protection of the environment. Kenya is currently limited by lack of knowledge and lack of government support, but they're at least aware of the issue on the ground. The localized, almost everybody knows that there's problems going on. Whereas the US, sometimes we live in our own little bubbles and we don't notice, oh, that giant hurricane that killed all those people in New York, that might have been because of climate change. As far as water resources go, Kenya has experienced the effects of climate change on water more than I think that the US has. I don't know if that's just because we aren't paying attention to the hurricanes, but if you look at media especially, the US doesn't cover as much about localized issues that Kenya does. As far as architecture goes, there's lots of green architecture that could be incorporated into Kenyan society that could help with this. And there has been like passive energy and stuff, an increase in that throughout Kenya. My key takeaways, climate change's largest effect is on precipitation. Populace is aware of these changes, but has not connected it to the global larger changes in climate and the media localizes climate issues, and the agriculture sector is heavily affected by these changes. And that's all. Here's my sources. Thank you for listening.